already know what's happened in the last 12 years, 12 months of lockdown. The educational landscape has completely changed. So it's really good that after going through the pain and all these changes, we try to reflect and see what everyone has done, what is happening in different places, so we can learn from each other, sharing practices of what else is being done out there. So this is part of the SICSA education group. We are all the organizer, including me, SICSA education champions. Unfortunately, Mark couldn't be here today because he's on paternity leave. He just had a new baby and he wishes us well. Okay, let's start with the first presentation, first year informatics student experience of learning with Judy Robertson, Fiona, and Serda. Unfortunately, Judy is not going to be there today, so we only have Fiona and Serda to present the first one. Please, whenever you can share your presentation.
All right. Because of the time, I'm just going to dive into it. Good afternoon, everybody, and nice to be here. And probably between me and my co-presenters, I'm the least known to this community. So I'm going to just introduce myself. I am a lecturer in data and digital literacy in the Morehouse School of Education in University of Edinburgh. So I'm not in the necessarily computer sciences informatics community, but I work with colleagues who are in there, Judy Robertson and Fiona. So this project was basically centered around the first year students' experience, especially in the context of COVID. And I'll try to, probably it's going to be a fast-paced presentation. So just to give you a little context, Fiona started her reader role in University of Edinburgh last summer, and I think the big project was that she was leading this course on for the first year's Informatics Connect. And mainly, one of the main purpose of the course was to help students, to support them in their first year, especially in terms of skills regarding learning in online and blended settings. And so as a collaborative project, we thought about using this group and the course as a way to collect information about their students' self-efficacy. The reason we looked at self-efficacy is in the research indicates self-efficacy is a strong predictor of student success and also associated with online learning. And also we wanted to look at computer science attitude, kind of their sense of belongingness in the community, especially starting from, in online settings, in remote settings. And also we wanted to also more broadly, use this information to inform and continue the conversation about teaching undergraduates computer science in online settings in an inclusive way. So our research questions were centered around students' level of self-efficacy toward online learning and their attitudes toward computer science learning environment, as well as their views, more kind of qualitative views in terms of studying online, kind of social relationships, community sense. So there were two parts to the study. First part was an online survey, which we distributed to all participants of the course, all first year students, about 400 students in total. And this survey had 4 sections, the demographics, and then we adopted an online learning self-efficacy instrument published in 2013. And also, along with that 2013 study, there was the learning satisfaction part, which we also adopted for our study, looking at how satisfied they were feeling at the end of the semester. And the computer science attitude, we used another scale, which was already published on this construct. And this was done, the data were collected on the survey at the end of the semester 1. And we had about 100 students who responded to the survey. That's kind of quarter of all the students. But cleaning all the data and looking at all the meaningful responses, we were left with about 67, which is equivalent of 17% response rate for the survey. And second part of the study was kind of looking into more in-depth understanding of how students responded to the questionnaire, because all of the questions in the survey is close-ended. And so between December and February, we approached students. We invited them to do follow-up interviews, and 21 students agreed, and we collected data in the last few months. So I'm going to start with kind of looking at the data in the online survey, just looking at the participants out of 67 in terms of the gender breakdown. We have about 2/3 of them were female, and 1/3, close to 1/3, was female students, while there were some other indicators there. We also, in terms of demographics, wanted to look into students' kind of residency, as well as their citizenship or international status, because University of Edinburgh in general has a wide large number of international students. Just looking at this table, you can see almost half of the students were international. And we also wanted to see, because of the pandemic, whether these students were taking the courses locally, they made the trip to Edinburgh, or especially internationals, were they participating from their home. So that shows the breakdown of where students were and whether they are UK citizens or not. And so the self-efficacy for online learning scale has 5 sub-dimensions or subscales to it, from handling tools in a learning management system, which is Learn in our case, but there are also other tools that was particularly used in informatics courses and different courses, and also self-efficacy to complete an online course. And the last 3 shown here is about interaction with instructor and interaction with classmates, both socially and academically. Just looking at the numbers, they felt most confident in terms of handling the learning tools, I think, which is not surprising, especially for informatics computer science students. And the second was in terms of their confidence in completing different tasks for online course. And that kind of goes down in the numbers with interaction with instructors, interaction with classmates, and interaction with classmates in a social level. I think good thing to note is we also use this survey, and for the most part, in other parts of the university, because we expanded this project later on. So we collected data outside the informatics, outside the first-year students, and these averages are actually above the university-wide student data, especially for the first 2 years students. So informatics first-year students showing kind of higher confidence in these skills. One thing I also found looking at the analysis was the interaction with instructors was significantly different for students for international, and that's also related to the housing. There was no significant difference between male and female students in terms of their confidence in there, but we found this significant difference as they interact with instructors. Surprisingly, international students, which is making up half of this, the survey participants, felt more confident interacting with instructors. And we looked at it in terms of housing as well, but it's kind of the same thing, because the housing basically looks at the one half of the international students. It's more enhanced, amplified here. I mean, it's interesting to see, and I'm happy to kind of get into it in the questions, maybe, because just have to limited time here. But that was the difference we noticed there. In terms of learning satisfaction, so this was a different scale. As you can see at the bottom, it was 1 to 5. So numbers kind of looking higher, but in terms of overall satisfaction, they are somewhat saying that they were satisfied with their learning experience in that. And we did not observe any difference by gender, citizenship, or housing situation here. And the third part of the survey was computer science attitude, which was comprised of students' confidence, interest in computer science, and their sense of belongingness to the field, and their sense of usefulness, whether they find the computer science as useful for their future prospects, as well as encouragement, which is about whether they received any encouragement from their family members, from from friends or others. And numbers show that their interest in computer science and they reported usefulness seem to be the highest among these subscales, whereas the lowest one is the encouragement. And one difference we observed in terms of the demographics breakdown was in here, and it wasn't the international status, it was actually the gender. I wish we had more interaction here. I would want to kind of leave you to guess it, but because of the time, I'm just going to reveal it there. So this was, as you might guess, male students felt more confident in terms of their ability to do well in computer science, whereas female students were less confident. And this was statistically significant between the two groups. And then kind of just quickly talk about the follow-up interviews. There isn't kind of a full report yet here because we're just starting to analyze this data. As you know, just looking at the demographics, we had the kind of a different distribution in the participation. Most of them were male students, and most of these students, kind of because it's volitional and self-selected, they were mostly engaging and attending the session for the Informatics Connect course last semester. And overall, students felt they learned adequately well online. Biggest challenge, what I found from the ones that I did was the challenge of focus and engagement, and especially social interaction with others. And that kind of touches on community, sense of community, building community, which I believe Fiona will touch on her presentation.
I'm afraid.
Are we out of time?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just gonna bring it to the conclusion slide then. So, the struggle was about the peer relations there. And, kind of they were somewhat positive about their learning outcomes. And there is much further analysis to be done with the qualitative interviews there. And thank you for your time. And I don't know if you have any time for questions.
Yes, you have 5 minutes. That's something I forgot to mention. You can post a question and unmute to elaborate, but since no one has posted the question because I didn't mention it before, you have 5 minutes for questions before the next presentation.
So I have a question, if I may. I'm not sure if there's a hand functionality here, but I'll just dive into it. So I thought it was very interesting to see the computer science attitudes that you investigated. And I'm wondering, do we know what these look like during non-lockdown times so we can compare?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Unfortunately, we don't have that data. I mean, I don't have that data. I don't know if Fiona has anything to add there. One thing what we're doing is, I think with the first year students, it's hard to kind of even ask them to compare. This is their first year experience in the college, in the university. But we're also collecting data in parallel. Is a kind of a broader study for students' experiences, online learning experiences, and we are still collecting data as a kind of focus group and are targeting third year, fourth year students. And that can touch on, I mean, it's not about computer science attitude and confidence, but that can touch on how students can compare their experience learning online versus in traditional settings.
An interesting follow-up study would be, well, in a year or two, whenever it is that we go back to completely normal, see what the students, first year students at that time thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I mean, in an ideal world, we would have done that first and then moved on to this. Obviously, that's not how coronavirus works. But yeah, I mean, I'm particularly interested to see those gender differences, which are quite stark for some of the questions. Are those replicating what's happening anyway? Is an online environment influencing that? Yeah, we don't know the answers, but I'd definitely like to see follow-up research on that.
Any other question? If no question, can I ask a question?
Please do.
Okay, right. The sense of belonging. The slide that mentions computer science sense of belonging. Did you notice any difference between international student and UK student regarding the sense of belonging?
Right. So I mean, I looked at all of those scales, subscales in the demographic comparisons, and that was not captured. That didn't come out as any significant difference in the international students. That the only difference was about the confidence, and that was for the gender.
Informally, I can say from the interviews that I did that the students who had a sense of belonging, there seems to be a strong correlation between students who felt they had developed a sense of belonging, which most of them said they hadn't, and students who are engaging with student societies and getting involved in that. But people who would be able to somehow form peer relations, particularly through the student societies, and that didn't seem, I mean, but this is just, we haven't analysed this data yet, but it didn't seem to be influenced by where we're from. There's a wide range of students engaging with societies.
Okay, thank you. That's 15 minutes. Perfectly. So we are moving to the next presentation. If you have further questions, remember we have at the end from a 4:15, we'll have informal meetings where you can interact with the presenter and ask further questions. So the next presentation is blended courses easier to offer online during the pandemic. Think again. That's by Areti.
Yes, so let me just share my screen. Good. I'll maximize. I hope you can all see it now. If not, please give me a shout. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Areti. I am a lecturer at the University of St Andrews. And today I'm going to talk about the experience of teaching a blended course during lockdown, which had to be turned fully online. And I have to say this was offered at the University of Edinburgh, where I was working at the time. So I think you can get the main message from the title. I thought it would have been easier to go fully online, and it wasn't. So I'm here to share those experiences, things that worked and things that didn't. So I'll give you a brief overview of the course because it's not your typical computer science course. So the course is called Data Science in Medicine, and it was developed to address the digital skills gap that exists in the medical and healthcare world. It is a compulsory course for all year 2 students in the medical school. So we're not talking about computer science students, but rather medical students who have typically no computing background. And it's a very short course. It's just 6 weeks. And it really covers the fundamentals of data science, looking at statistics, a little bit touching on relational databases, graph data, and epidemiology. And this is perhaps the most innovative course I've ever developed. It's the first of its kind in the UK. And the fact that it's innovative in a way means that it's been a very creative process for me to come up with a design and to offer the course, find ways to offer it to this particular audience. But also it's been quite challenging, and perhaps, again, the most challenging teaching experience I've had. So it's been offered for about 3 years, and over the 3 years, it evolved continuously based on student feedback and the experience we've had with teaching the course. And then the pandemic happened, and then we had to rethink again. So traditionally, the course was offered in a blended mode. So in a way, flipped classroom-like. So it consists mainly of online video and a few face-to-face mini lectures. So one at the beginning and one at the end. So most of the studying and theory covering, the students do at their own time at home, while tutorials and labs, which are the hands-on and group-based component, they would typically do face-to-face. So in small groups in the tutorials and in larger groups in the programming labs. And I have to say, these are medical students, and already kind of throwing at them things like R programming has been a shock to their system, I have to say. And then during lockdown, last September to December, we had to move all the on-campus activities fully online. So the tutorials were offered online live, again in small groups. And the labs, the programming labs, took place online. The mini lectures were not offered except for the final mini lecture, which was a kind of wrap up and a quiz, interactive quiz with a prize. So the things that I considered in terms of pedagogy when moving to fully online, and I have to say I have a lot of experience in fully online, but with groups that have chosen to do fully online learning, and that's very, very different. So what I thought was important is to put students first. So whenever you need to change elements of your teaching, think how would the student feel about this? How would they experience it? So there were three main things that I considered in this transition. So the first one was about simplifying and prioritizing learning content and activities. So it is clear to me that delivering, offering teaching online can sometimes be slower when we're talking about live synchronous learning. And also there's a lot of glue that is needed for the asynchronous bits, and that takes time for the students. So I thought it was important to simplify. And that's something that I worked hard on, especially on the programming side of things, which the students used to find rather challenging. The second consideration was around supporting students and guiding them, and providing scaffolding. And what do I mean by that? I mean, well, they don't get to see you in class, so you need to make sure that they understand that you're around. So email communications is one way, making sure that they know that you're there to support them, either through virtual office hours or drop-in sessions. And then the guidance and scaffolding, that's something I've seen a lot in online learning, and especially with MOOCs, so large-scale online learning, where you can't be answering thousands of emails from students. You need to provide really, really detailed and clear instructions on how to navigate the learning activities and the learning content, and what the expectations are. The last element was to do with computing resources and IT issues. And remember, these are not tech savvy students, and what we used to do to work around that was ask them to only work in the computer labs, so they wouldn't need to install anything on their own computers, and we would have our studio there for them to use, and that seemed to work fairly well. Now with the pandemic and not having access to computing resources, that was a big challenge, and luckily we managed to use a cloud-based solution that is very similar to what our studio look like normally. So how was this fully online data science and medicine version received? I have to say that student reactions overall, I found them quite impressive. I found that for second year students, they were quite mature and understanding, and they seemed to be open to new ideas. So they appreciated the difficulty of the situation, and there was no complaining around that. I think they were a little bit more open-minded, perhaps. What I found was different compared to the previous years was that discussion boards on the virtual learning environment were more popular. And this is interesting because I tried really hard in the previous years to get these students to use the discussion boards. This is not something that they were encouraged to do in the previous years or in other courses in their curriculum. So it was fairly new to them, and uptake was quite low in the previous years. This year, during the pandemic, much better. So maybe it's a matter of how much it is needed. Now, that said, I experienced an email overload. It is the first time with this course and this kind of students, is the first time I received that many emails. And very often it was about trivial things that they had seen on the website and they just wanted to double check or, you know, sanity checking. And what this tells me, without having done research on this, but my gut feeling is that they were feeling uncertain, feeling isolated, and they just wanted, you know, a little bit more hand holding than expected, really. Having discussed this with colleagues in other disciplines, they have informally told me that it is the same. So I'm curious to hear whether this has been the experience with the rest of you in your teaching. Now, in terms of challenges and thinking back to the pedagogical considerations that I mentioned earlier, so simplifying content, I thought it was important, but the challenge I had here was not to oversimplify. And remember, this is a 6-week course. It's already fairly simplified. So it was really hard to find a balance. And to be honest, if I was to do it again, I would tweak some things and see how it's received. I don't think we've nailed it yet. Another challenge that I had was around training tutors and lab demonstrators to offer the problem-based hands-on interactive activities, so the tutorials and the labs. They did receive training from the university. I also offered a 1 hour and a half training session, but this is something that takes practice. And I've heard mixed feedback from students, and it's understandable. I don't have any solutions to this, so I'm curious if you have found ways that work around training tutors and lab demonstrators. And finally, another challenge I've had was a challenge I used to have even before the pandemic. So how to motivate the course and make it relevant to future medics, and kind of build this course narrative. And now that we didn't have this kind of face-to-face component, it became a little bit more challenging. This is something to consider in the future. So scaffolding is important and guidance is important, but what I've come to realize is that perhaps a little bit more personal time with a course organizer, that being me, would have been beneficial in hindsight.
Well, perfect timing if that's the end, because
I will just move on to the conclusions, if that's okay. So just to say, and I'm not going to cover this, so we experimented with programming labs online with 2 different modalities: instructor-led, so live showing, versus them following videos during the session, and the videos were much better received. So that's interesting. I was not expecting that. Feel free to ask me more about the programming lab if you want. So some tips to share: keep it simple, work on student communication and support, and be open with students. So that's something I've learned throughout this period, that they understand, they appreciate, they listen. And also it's a time perhaps to experiment and try out new ideas, like the experiment we run with the 2 modalities of the programming lab. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Arita. Ariti. So there are a few questions there on the chat. So Jeremy asked the first question: were your discussion boards anonymous, or did students have to use logins? And do you think anonymization encourages interaction?
That is that's a good question, Jeremy. And well, in this particular course, It was not anonymous, and that was a conscious decision. I've had long, long discussions with colleagues about this, and I don't think there's a golden answer here. Truth is, I haven't tried making it anonymous to see if there's a difference with this kind of cohort. So perhaps this is something to consider.
Okay. There is another. Well, that's one comment from Savi, who says that yes, email overload. But Mohammed also asked a question: what is the student engagement percentage in live tutorials? And also, will the slides we share? Oh yes, of course. Please, everyone who is presenting, could you please send the your slides to Anastasia, so she can share, because people are interested in what you guys are doing. We know, we are very conscious that the presentation is quite short, so people don't get the chance to actually study, read what you guys are doing. So yes, the question, what is the student engagement percentage in live tutorial?
So so it is compulsory for students in year 2 in the medical school to attend tutorials. So we take attendance. Now, I haven't got the exact figures. My impression was that it was perhaps a little bit lower than previous years when it was face-to-face. And I can imagine this being due to connectivity issues. Not everyone was in Edinburgh. Not everyone had a good connection. But this is pure speculation here. So yeah, good question.
So there is Charlotte who said, Charlotte would like to hear a little bit more about the programming lab session. Unfortunately, we would not probably have enough time for you to discuss this. But remember, at the end of the workshop today, we have extra time, but we can still have one last question. Okay. So was there a lot of student discussion on the discussion board, or did they find it it was mostly student staff question and answer? What style of discussion happened there?
That's a very good question. And the short answer is it was mostly student staff. Despite us trying really hard to encourage people to answer each other's questions, we upvoted any answers they gave to their classmates' questions. So we really, really tried hard. We didn't really nail it, I think. So I'm curious to hear any suggestions that the rest of the community has.
Okay, the time is nearly up. I'm just going to ask a very quick question. Did you have any assessment for your short course?
Yes, 2 practical pieces of coursework.
Oh, okay.
They did spectacularly well. They are very, very good students, these students.
And because, did you have any student complaining about, because you said the material was so easy, did you have any student complaining that it was too easy or a little bit too difficult or something?
No,
like
it's the other way around.
Okay.
We try to simplify, but this is still quite advanced and different data science for people studying medicine. So,
okay, thank you very much, Ariti. Now we will move to the next presentation, building accessible communities. This is Fiona McNeil. Fiona.
Okay, let me just share my screen. Okay, can you see that? Yeah, cool. Okay, thank you. So it's good to be here. So the talk that Serdar did earlier that's some proper grown-up research we've done with methodologies and everything. This is more just, here's some stuff I did last year and here's some stuff that I think about it. So I'm not claiming there's anything particularly objective about this, and I'm sure that a lot of you and a lot of other people will have done similar things and may have had different experiences to me, but this is just sharing some things that I feel that I've learned from last year that will that I want to take on with me in my teaching in the future. So I worked a lot with our first years this year. I'm from the University of Edinburgh, and we have about 400 first years. So firstly, I developed a course called Informatics Connect. I developed that last summer, and I just sorry, I'm just setting the timer. I developed that last summer, and the main focus for that for me was to do with building community, and it was also to do, as said, I was talking about in his presentation, to do with making sure they had the skills to deal with the online learning environment. I also taught object-oriented programming in the second semester. That's one of the 2 core courses that the whole of our first year cohort have to take. And I also set up a network for students to volunteer as tutors working in schools in deprived areas. We've actually done very little tutoring because of COVID issues, but we've done a lot of work in building models about what we want to do and developing outreach materials to work with those students. That's not all first years, but it does include a lot of first years. So I've interacted with them in different ways, which has been very interesting. Sorry, my mouse has gone to go on. Okay, so Informatics Connect, it was an optional, sort of optional. I tried to, at least to begin with, to say this is kind of core and you should be coming along to this, but it's non-credit bearing, which obviously makes a huge difference to engagement. So it ran throughout the whole year, and semester 1, we started off with a weekly plenary session on Monday morning, where we'd have a theme of the week, and we'd be talking about that. And I'd also do a lot of polling to see what was going on with their experiences. Actually, I think I missed a slide there. No, sorry. And then later on the week, Thursday and Friday, we have breakout groups where they were all in different smaller groups, and they'd be working in small groups to discussion base around these issues. In the second semester, we moved to just having once a week sessions. So there was a bit less discussion involved in that. One of the reasons for that was because I was teaching a big course that semester, so I couldn't really do it. But also student responses were quite mixed. Quite a lot of people liked the discussion groups and the breakout stuff. But on the whole, it was more popular just to do it once a week, I think, because it took up less of their time. So attendance was very high in the beginning of the first semester, 200 and 250 for the first few weeks, but it dropped off quite quickly to, I would say, between 30 and 100, but that was really consistent from the second half of the first semester and all through the second semester. It varied depending on what the topic was, and we didn't really see very significant dropout. So the objectives, as I said, was to build a peer network and to help them develop these skills. Also, I really wanted a space where we could look at, I just thought it'd be really fun to have a space where we could look at issues in computing that don't really get addressed very much in the courses, things like ethics, things like what's going on in the department, which I really thought would help or hoped would help with their sense of belonging. And also I wanted it to be a forum where we were engaging with our first year students to see how they were finding online learning. When I was developing the course, I was talking about kind of co-development with the first years, which actually wasn't the case at all. I don't think what resulted could in any way be called co-development, but at least it was a way of finding out how they're experiencing it and feeding that back to the teaching staff and having a discussion, an ongoing discussion with the first years about how they're experiencing it and how they wanted things to be. So these are the topics we covered. So you can see, to begin with, we had how to do group work, how to use all the different systems they had to be using. We've got ethics of drones, technology and social media, AI and killer robots, those kind of things. Then we've got more practical stuff like study skills, mental health week, how to prepare for take-home exams, etc. And then the things that were really popular is when I got other students to come along and talk to them. So we had discussions with fourth years and recent graduates, that's semester 1, week 7, and that was really helpful actually, because a lot of them said that they'd found first year really hard and hadn't done well, but ultimately had got a really good degree, which I think was a message that was really useful. The most successful, certainly in second semester, was the final one, preparing for second year, where I got a few second years to come along and just talk to them about the experience, and they really valued that. We had some researchers in the school come along and talked about the kind of research that's going on in the department, which was also really popular. So in terms of what they enjoyed, so I did quite a lot of polling and quite a lot of surveys to try and get their feelings on this. The ones that for sure that were the most popular were the practical ones. How do you become an intern in the department? How do you get a job as a demonstrator? The kind of useful things, those are really popular. The kind of ones around ethics and interesting social issues around computing were less popular, but some of the students really valued that a lot of the students get engaged with that really well, although fewer. It was very interesting what they were doing in that. And the once a week approach was favoured by most people. So what am I going to do about this next year? So the students were very clear that they thought that this should continue. And although this was designed to be something that they had in place when they weren't doing any face-to-face teaching. They felt that actually this is something that we should run anyway. So I'm going to be I'm interested to see how that goes and whether attendance will be less or not, but they were clear that it would be really useful. I also would really like to look at how they could get some credit out of this. I would expect for most students this would be a non-credit bearing course. But I'm interested in, for the students who are really interested, particularly in stuff like the ethics and so forth, how we can develop this into a course where they could actually do their own little projects and get credit for it. And it's been a really useful forum for me and for the staff to engage with the students in terms of how it's helped them build their peer relations. I think that it's been less successful than I'd hoped, partly because it's very difficult to run small groups where they're with the same people all the time when the attendance is very variable. And that's something I'm going to talk about more in a minute. But in terms of this open conversation with the students, I just really valued it, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm definitely going to be running that next year. So moving on from that, I'm going to talk a bit about my experience of working in small groups in these different environments. And I've talked to a lot of people about experience, how they found small group work when that's happening online. So most people have said it just doesn't work. It's really hard. Students don't engage. What happens is hardly anyone has their camera on. A lot of people don't have their mics on. There's just a lot of silence. If you're the tutor or whatever, it's really hard work to try and get anything going. Sometimes it works okay because you have enough students who are engaged, but generally, no, this is not good. And I think what's happening there is that what people are doing is they're just taking what they did in the face-to-face environment and they're putting it online without any adjustments. And this is what we did for the tutorials for the object-oriented programming course. We felt like we need to put tons of work into making all the lectures online and making that really good, but we have the tutorials already, so they can just do that, and that's fine. I think in retrospect, that was a mistake. I think that if you want these things to work online, you actually need to put a bit more effort into it than that, because students find it really intimidating to engage online. And I was a bit like, they're the TikTok generation, they're online all the time. It's not a problem. And I was really surprised how much of a problem it was. But I think they're used to really highly curated stuff that they put online about themselves. And this idea that you're just out there talking about the questions in the tutorial sheet is really intimidating. Certainly for these first year students that I was working with, but a lot of other people in different teaching environments have said this to me as well. So what we were doing in Informatics Connect in the small group work there, it was still discussion based, but we were using Padlet. So there was a kind of visual way of interacting. I don't know how many of you have used Padlet, but it's essentially like an online screen where you can put post-it notes and everybody shares the same screen, so you can see what other people are doing and you can add to it and you can comment on it. And I found that generally led to much better engagement. Still, the verbal discussions tend to be what's driving it. So you still have problems where there's not always that much engagement. But the fact that you have this written way to engage as well is really helpful. And then students who don't have their mics on actually are sometimes engaging quite a lot via the Padlet. So that really helps. Of course, Informatics Connect was more students who chose to come along, so that already gives it an advantage. So I'm not exactly comparing like to like, but I think that this is really useful. There are still significant variations in how much groups engage, and sometimes groups are really great, and sometimes they're not. But I think that there's a clear difference in how successful it is when you've got this form of doing it. So then what we did in the tutoring network, and this happened largely because it wasn't run by me. I got a social scientist in who's got experience in participatory research with young people, who had a completely, just such a different way of viewing this interaction. And that was really interesting. And what she was using was Miro. I don't know if people have used Miro. There's a lot of other tools like this. It's essentially a kind of extended form of Padlet, where you can do all kinds of really interesting interactive stuff. You can set up a huge amount of things up on Miro. I would have done a little demonstration if I'd had a bit more time. But that means it doesn't need to be verbally led. Like, the whole discussions can be based on this screen. And you can talk as well, but if people aren't talking, it's not so much of a problem. And that was really, that worked really well. It's also a really non-threatening way for students to comment on each other's contributions, because you can make it anonymous. So you can comment on everything else that's going on. And that interactive stuff was really, really successful, I think.
Time is up.
All right, okay. Anyway, what I really want to do is see how I can integrate that into a face-to-face tutorial. So you've got face-to-face, but you've also got things going on I also have some stuff on feedback, but I guess I won't talk about that now. So I was doing a lot with ongoing feedback and talking to them all the time about how they were feeling about the stuff. That was really helpful. But I can talk about that in the questions if you want. So anyway, face-to-face teaching, I can't wait to get back to it. I think it works better, but I do think there's lots of useful things. This conscious thinking about teaching has been really useful for me this year. So sorry, that was a bit rushed.
Okay, thank you, Fiona. That's quite interesting, and you have quite a lot of comments coming up there. So you have a question already. Jeremy asked a question. Did you achieve higher than average engagement from traditional ComSci minority groups? Was this an explicit objective of the course?
So that's an interesting question, and I don't really have the data for that. So I did do a lot of polling, but mostly it was quite informal polling. So informally, I would say that the gender ratio was quite good. There were quite a lot of girls who were engaging quite well. In terms of other minority groups, that's hard to say. I would say there probably was a dominance of English-speaking students for whom English was their first language. But no, I really don't have a lot of data on that, and data on that would be extremely useful.
And Mohammed asked, was there any online strategy to increase the students' attendance and to improve their interaction in a consistent way along the coursework semester?
Do you mean like a school level strategy, or just that I was personally trying to implement in my teaching?
Maybe Mohammed could elaborate.
Yeah, sure. I will ask. Yeah, so thanks for your presentation. I just want to ask about that. The students sometimes in the beginning they start to have a very good presence. After that, when they start to have assignments, exams, start to drop off, and you can see that actually in a lot of things like watching the video lectures, even attending the tutorials. So if there is a way, strategies to keep them the same presence along all the semester.
So in the course that I was teaching, we didn't have a particular strategy. I mean, I would communicate with them a lot about how important it was and encourage them. We didn't really have a particular way to incentivize them. For the other first year, the compulsory first year course in the first semester, they got credit for not for going to the tutorials, but they had to do work in the tutorials that was assessed. That obviously makes a huge difference to attendance. We didn't do that because we had bigger assignments, bigger programming assignments, and also we had ongoing assessment. There was quizzes to try and make sure they were engaging with the lectures and also doing the surveys so we could find out how they're feeling about things, but no way particularly to incentivize them to go to tutorials. And I think that maybe that was a mistake, because you're right that attendance dropped off. And yeah, I think that's something I would want to think about for next year.
Another question, Jeremy asked another question. Did you pay for Padlet or use the free version?
No, I just use the free version, which is kind of annoying actually, because you only get you get 6 or something, so I'd have to constantly be deleting it so I could reuse the same one. I don't think the School of Informatics have that. I think maybe Murray House have that they have like a commercial license. I don't know.
Yeah,
but you can get away. Yeah, you can get away with just using the free version if you're constantly deleting things, but it's not ideal.
Just to kind of go back to Mohammed's question about increasing engagement, one attempted strategy in the first semester, so I was one of the tutors for the groups. Our intention was to keep the groups kind of stable across within the groups, kind of so that they can build sense of cohort among themselves. But technology kind of created challenges because we asked them to use Zoom, and then we asked them to create an account so that they can be recognized, and Zoom can create auto groups. But then participation varied from week to week, so you could really have homogeneous and same number of people in the same group, and they didn't necessarily create their own accounts so that the system can recognize them. So we couldn't find a good solution to how to keep the groups consistent. I think that was a good intention, but didn't work.
I spent so much time at the beginning of the semester creating all these groups and making them gender balanced. So they were all 50-50 female or no female, and try and mixing nationalities up and stuff. And it just didn't work, partly for the technical reasons. That was a complete nightmare, but also for the attendance reasons. So sometimes you said one person in a group. So that didn't work. And I don't know what the solution to that is, but I would like to think about it a bit.
Thank you, Fiona. This is something we can discuss at the end because it's quite interesting what you did there about the groups. So we have our last presentation for the first section of the workshop. And now, because we are running a little bit late, I'm wondering, the break, it means that the second session is going to start a little bit late as well because I guess everyone needs their 15 minutes break. So we'll start the last session now. We are programming, pair programming for collaborative learning in online computer labs with Charlotte.
Yes.
Please.
Okay, let me. Okay. Let me share that properly. Okay. Can you see that? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So thanks very much for the three previous talks. I just want to say that I will echo many of the points in my talk that were already brought up. There's definitely many things that we found common problems and challenges and solutions and things like that. So I'm Charlotte Devage. I'm a university teacher in mathematical computing in the School of Mathematics at the University of Edinburgh. And I teach mainly programming or sub-courses with some programming element to it, a computing element. So first of all, I just want to give some background in what are computing courses or courses with computing look like in School of Math. So there's a good number of them from all the way from year 1 to MSc level. Most of them are taught in either Python or R, although there are a few with kind of more specialist languages. Topics include things like numerical analysis, stats, data science, operational research. Many of these courses run usually drop-in computer labs. So you're kind of typical computer room, students come in and sit for an hour and a half or 2 hours. Tutors walk around the room, come check in with students, help if necessary. And typically during a lab, although some of the students come and just work on their own, usually students sit next to 1 or 2 friends and end up helping each other and working together. So last summer, obviously, we, I think, all very quickly found out that trying to run computer labs in a hybrid way with social distancing and good hygiene practice was not going to be viable, was not going to be a good use of our teaching spaces. So early in the summer, we decided that all the computer labs in the school would be run completely online. The new problem was that drop-in sessions like we used to do them for these labs were just not going to work. We were concerned about these sessions not being engaging at all, just the logistics of running a drop-in lab, how to, give students a chance to actually work together with a friend, because that's, how they make a lot of progress in these labs. It was just not going to work. So we had to think of something else. And that's where pair programming comes in. So I'll just quickly describe the workflow. I'm sure we're all familiar with it already. So 2 people usually work in a pair. In our case, that's 2 students. Typically, they would sit next to each other in front of a computer. They have the roles of driver and navigator. The driver is in full control of the keyboard and mouse. Navigator is an active observer, and they help, and they can, consult documentation, things like this. After some time in a classroom, the students switch roles so that the old driver is now the navigator and the other way around. So in a typical session, both students and every student in the class essentially gets to be the driver and actually do some programming, even though they're working in groups. So pair programming obviously is a very widespread practice, both in industry, but also in computer science classrooms. And it's essentially a form of peer learning. So Our main driving factors for trying this in our online workshops were, well, there were several. First of all, we thought, again, as someone mentioned before, that working in small groups in a kind of virtual room or virtual environment, like tiny groups, 2 or 3 max, would allow each student to actually, take an active role during the workshop, contribute actively to solving the task. There's basically no, it doesn't leave students any room to sit back and kind of watch the workshop happen or watch a larger group do the work. Everyone has to actually engage and also talk to each other on the kind of social aspect. The structured or kind of scripted roles of driver and navigator were also something we hoped would be really helpful. Our students did definitely not sign up to do online learning or distance learning. They're not used to it. It's not particularly natural to figure out how to work together productively in like a Zoom meeting, for example. So having this kind of structure and these scripted roles, we were hoping would save not only time, but also cognitive effort in figuring out how to actually cooperate and work together productively. Another issue is if we talk about breakout rooms, for example, in a video software, we don't have the usual kind of oversight that you have walking around a computer lab, where you can quickly identify, who's struggling, who needs help. We can't just keep an eye on everyone at the same time, essentially. Working in pairs or in small groups means that the students are kind of constantly helping each other and working together as a team. So they have like an immediately accessible source of help on top of being able to then call in the tutor if they need more help. And finally, it was also an opportunity because we had to rethink our course delivery. We also took the opportunity and the momentum, I suppose, to rethink about our learning outcomes. And some of the changes were probably long overdue. And some of these, pair programming, that's something we were thinking about introducing anyway, before even COVID was a thing. So that was a kind of a good opportunity to refresh the course and in particular introduce, and emphasize good programming practice, working in a team, and kind of get students a bit more ready to the professional world. So pair programming at distance is usually referred to as distributed pair programming or remote pair programming. So before I describe what a typical session looked like, I'll just give a quick description of the 2 courses in which we did this. So the first course was in semester 1, it's called Python Programming. It's an MSc course. It's introductory, doesn't assume any previous programming knowledge. It's focused on programming skills. The second course in semester 2 in which we tried this is a year 2 course called Computing and Numerics. So it's also introductory and introduces Python. No previous programming experience is assumed, but the learning outcomes of this course are certainly much more focused on numerical methods and it has a much stronger mathematical flavor, essentially. So typically, this rectangle here is our Zoom meeting for a session. Typical session was 1 hour long. In the first 5 minutes, so these kind of red squares are the tutors, the one with a frame is the lead tutor. In the first 5 minutes or so, the lead tutor, we can say hi to everyone, wait for people to join, and in the meantime, to give a brief explanation, description of what the task was for that particular workshop. We chose to design a specific task for each of these sessions, and that task was revealed to the students at the start of the workshop. After this, the lead tutor, which is also, so we did all this in Zoom, the lead tutor was also the host of the Zoom meeting, created breakout rooms and assigned students in pairs as much as possible to breakout rooms. Sometimes there was groups of 3 for various reasons. I'll come back to this at the very end, just briefly. And tutors were co-hosts of the meeting, so they were free to go between all the breakout rooms. In a typical breakout room, we have 2 or maybe 3 students. One of them is driver, the other is the navigator. And the driver would share their screen, whoever's a driver at the time shares their screen, and students can work together like this, essentially. The process for kind of taking these roles working and switching roles is we used GitHub repositories. So we had a template repository for a task. Students would essentially create a repository for their team. So that was done with GitHub Classroom group assignments. That was fairly straightforward to set up. So driver was first clone that repo, share the screen, and start working. Navigator, in the meantime, would read instructions, be an active observer, and help them solve the task essentially. And after about 15 to 20, depending minutes, they switch roles. And to switch roles, old driver commits and pushes their changes to the shared repository. New driver pulls these changes, shares their screen, and picks up where the old driver left off. To get help, so tutors were able to navigate in the between the breakout rooms freely. However, so there's a help, I don't remember what it's called exactly, but in Zoom breakout rooms, there's a button to call for help or call for instructor or something like that. When students click that button, only the meeting host, not the co-hosts, receives a notification. So we had to find a way for the lead tutor, the meeting host, to communicate which room needed help to the team. So to do that, we use a separate channel. We use Teams, actually. We had a Teams channel in which at every session, the lead tutor made a post tagging all the tutors so that they would get notifications. I found it easier to do this with my phone so that if I was busy talking with a student but got notification as the lead tutor, I would just take my phone, put in the room number, and that was it. That was very quick to do and very easy. And then I asked tutors to basically react somehow to one of the replies to indicate that they were taking the ticket, essentially. So that's something we kind of improvised, but turns out it worked really well, so we kept using this. Now, how did it go? Mostly quite well. So this is a little word cloud that I made with the mid-semester feedback from semester 1. I did that in one of the code along videos for the course, actually. So I just wanted to share that with you. And that was the question was what you consider to be the most useful aspect of the workshop. And the overwhelming majority of responses for that question were some variation of discussing with classmates, helping each other, learning from each other. So that's pretty much exactly what we wanted to see. So we were very happy with that. Other positive comments concerned kind of, the tasks were interesting or, it's easy to get help from tutors, that kind of thing. A few kind of representative comments. One in particular, which I thought was interesting that I've heard a few times is, the computing workshop is like my kind of the most amount of social interaction, which is a bit depressing, I suppose. The students were really not, I think, having a good time and were feeling very isolated, but at least we're glad that they got to interact with classmates in a good way, in a productive way, in a fun way also during our workshops. Yeah. Negative comments, negative feedback. Most of them are about the time. 1 hour was way too short. We need at least 1.5 hours, ideally 2 hours, to really give them time to get into it. There was also some friction, especially at the beginning of the semester. This improved as the semester went on for both courses. But at the beginning of semester, we have some students, I'll come back to that a little bit later, but we have some students with very essentially low, what I'm going to call computer literacy or computer skills generally. They're not computer science students. I'll wrap up.
Your time, yes.
Okay. So yeah, issues with that and some issues with the compatible pairs. So just a few of these comments. One massive caveat I will mention, which is also similar to the others, is summarized by this comment. I didn't like the format, so I decided not to go to many of them. Obviously, the feedback that we get and the, even the informal feedback that we get is from students who do attend, but attendance did drop. It didn't drop more than it drops usually, especially in second semester for year 2 students. In math, we have a massive drop off of attendance after week 5 for some reason. So it wasn't more than usual, but still, attendance did drop, so it's hard to tell whether it worked for really everyone. An important issue was incompatible pairs. So usually with either a very experienced programmer and a complete beginner, or two complete beginners, it just didn't work. One thing I'll mention is Zoom was updated in autumn 2020. So we used that in the second semester to let students choose their own breakout rooms and work with friends. And they really appreciated that. Beginners also appreciated being able to work in threes instead of pairs. And what's next? Well, we're going to try to take some of this to hybrid and to eventually keep that in the classroom. So there's going to be issues around, tutor training, etc. But yeah, the idea is we already do our math and paper workshops in rooms like these, like teaching studios, where students sit in groups and work together already. So I think this makes a case for, maybe it's time to retire the old computer lab and try to do computer labs in a setting like this.
Okay. 3 minutes left for questions. I've seen one question there from Arita. Sorry, Ariti. I guess you've already answered most of those points she made, but
I think everything has been answered. I was too keen to find out, so thanks, Charlotte.
No worries.
Okay.
Did I ask a question, please, Maria? It's Jeremy here.
Please, ask the question.
Thanks. Really interesting talk. Thanks very much, Charlotte. I want to ask you whether students had trouble with systems. Were any of the students trying to use, say, iPhones or something silly like that to do their coding?
No, because we asked them in week 0 to install a bunch of software. We asked them to have a laptop that was able to install all that software. So something like Chromebook wasn't really viable. Some students managed to make it work, but we did, provide extensive instructions and lots of help, drop-in sessions for tech support in the first couple of weeks. But we did ask students to install, so for Python, we asked them to install Anaconda. We asked them to use VS Code, so install VS Code, create a GitHub account. So as you can imagine, it was a lot for, especially for, those students who are really just here to do math and did not expect to be taught any programming, and are not, don't have particularly developed computer literacy skills even. But, with practice, with doing it every week, it did improve. But yeah, it was still sometimes a bit difficult during the workshop, especially the first few weeks, essentially, where there was a lot of time spent on, okay, what do you mean commit and push? I don't know what that means. Technical issues. Yeah, the drop-in tech support sessions in first week helped a lot. That's something I had to improvise in the first semester and planned carefully in the second semester, but it did help sort most of the problems.
Fiona asked a question. Did some students struggle with choosing their own group?
Yes. Well, okay. The way we did it was we create a bunch of breakout rooms, we open them, and then students can see them and just, they choose a number with their friend and they go. And then I said, whoever, doesn't have anyone to work with or doesn't really mind, stay in the main room. And in 2 minutes, whoever is still here, I'll just assign them randomly. So usually like 70% of the students, I'd say, would just go in their own rooms. And then some of them would just kind of pick someone they didn't know and go work with them. And the rest, I just kind of kept assigning myself arbitrarily, whoever was left.
Okay, this is perfect timing, just time for coffee. If no one has a quick question, I believe this is the end of the first session.
Okay, so I think that's pretty much past now. So the first talk is going to be, I thought of Said, but is it Waka? Is that right?
Waka, yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
thank you.
Great. So Waka's going to be talking about using electronic books.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. So my name is Wakar. I'm a lecturer here in the School of Computing Science at University of Glasgow. And I'll be talking about my experience of using Moodle books to collate the resources for a course, for a couple of courses, and create a narrated learning journey. So I'll talk briefly about the origins. How did I end up with using books? I'll talk a bit about how I am now using them for a couple of courses, and then I'll show you some analysis and some discussion around it. So that's my plan for the talk. So talking about how it started off. So, well, briefly talking about VLEs first. So they have been around since around the mid-90s. So they have, you can see a list of common uses. I plagiarized off Wikipedia, but my focus is on content management today. So there are other things you can do in a VLE like curriculum mapping, learner engagement, communication, real-time communication. But the thing I did slightly differently was the content management. And that is my focus on how I'm using this before and how I'm using it now for managing content around my courses. So pre-pandemic Moodle, how was I using it? And I presume at least some of my colleagues as well. In typical case, you have a course landing page with your lecture notes and slides listed in some way, maybe organized into topics, maybe simply listed as lecture 1, lecture 2, lecture 3, and so on, and possibly links to text and reading lists and so on as well. So that was a pre-pandemic typical use of a Moodle course, at least the way I was using it. Then pandemic happened, and then my immediate change was simply to add link to my video lectures in the exact same format. So all else being the same, the new thing now is it's pandemic. I'm recording my lectures now. So I started putting my recorded lectures there as well in pretty much the same format. So this flat wall of text and links on the course landing page, maybe divided into sections. Then I got to designing an online self-paced maths course in a lockdown environment. So in this particular course, I was going to simply curate resources and put them on Moodle. I was not meant to create my own. So using resources like BBC Bite Size, YouTube videos, Khan Academy, number file, and so on. But I realized that I needed to create a narration around them, which was missing. And I couldn't do that in the way I was using Moodle back then. So I looked around and I realized Moodle books might be a good fit for it. And later on, what I did was I ported all that my lessons learned to my regular courses as well. And I think they have worked quite well, which is I want to share. So second part, how am I using Moodle books now for my courses? So Moodle books, first of all, this is code from Moodle's website. They allow teachers to create multi-page resources in a book-like format, table of contents, multimedia integration, and you can print them into a PDF or a document as well. So how I am using Moodle books, I have no idea why PowerPoint threw that injection at me. It just came up automatically, but I'm using it for collation and narration. These are the two things that I'm using Moodle books that I wasn't quite able to do before very well. So my first use case was, like I said, it was a self-paced online course, completely asynchronous, where I was not creating content, just curating content, collating and narrating it. So I'll briefly take you to my Moodle page and make this slightly more tangible. So let me show you around the place here. You can see right on the right over here, you have the table of contents. So I had multiple units. You can see unit 1 algebraic skills over here, and each unit was basically a book. And the book chapters, subsections, and so on, you can have all that. You can see this is some of what I meant by narration. This is text I wrote just to get the story started. In this particular case, I scribbled a little graph as well. But then you can see I'm linking to the third-party learning resources because, like I said, this was primarily a curation of resources. This is linking to BBC Bite Size, a little video at Bite Size. There was a self-test that I wanted people to do at this point. Then this was my signpost, little deep dive submarine here to say this is extra content. Go there if you want to, but not part of the core course. Here I was linking Khan Academy video. And then finally at the end, I did create a 5-minute video of my own as a bonus thing, our tutorial, and I put that there as well. So you can see what I mean by kind of a collation of different resources and some kind of a narration within a chapter, as you can see. And this table of contents allows you to create a narration or a continuity along the whole unit as well. Now, like I said, when I went to my regular course, which I would now again teaching in a lockdown situation, where I'm creating content, at least 20 plus hours of video and all the shebang, the tutorials and everything. Then I said, why not keep the Moodle book feature there as well? So that's what I did. So you can see somewhat different now. So my lectures are there as well as links signposted by these icons. These are the slides that I use for my lectures, but the other things are happening here as well. Something you can see is that I have some definitions before the lectures. I have links to external resources. I have a follow-on definition, which I missed in my lecture, so I put it over there. I have a link to a textbook chapter. So if you have textbooks online, they're very useful in this format. And again, the deep dive section. And finally, I have this key learning outcomes based on student feedback to what is the key takeaway of this chapter. So you can see, again, a similar use of books in a different kind of course. So in summary, what I'm using my Moodle books for is collating resources, my own content, third-party content. I'm providing resources pitched at different levels. So the lecture videos tend to be pitched at the average student, but some basic definitions for people who have some covering up to do, some more advanced videos, which for people who are really engaged and interested in that area, all of that can fit in, clearly signposted within the same chapter, and helps me create a narrated journey. Like I said, I can add pre and post notes and tell the occasional dad joke, which I'm better at doing on text rather than verbally. So I found a lot of uses for Moodle books. If I had more time, I would have created self-test quizzes for each chapter as well. And I would have put in my edited version of my captions there too for people who prefer to read rather than listen to me. So this was my use of Moodle books. So quick analysis of how it went, because I did take feedback from the students. So this is the first use case feedback. So, wall of text here, but you just focus on the underline highlighted things here. You can see accessible layout, clear start and finish, useful for beginners, a flow of learning, each topic building of the previous one. So the kind of expectation I had going into this Moodle books, I think were fulfilled based on the feedback I got from the students, reasonably well at least. This was the feedback from the second use case where I was creating my own content as well. So similar comments: makes navigating very easy, improve learning experience, useful links, easy to find material. This person said, couldn't think of a better way of organizing the amount of information, easy navigation. But there was this one negative comment. So at least one person found it difficult to navigate sections of the Moodle book as well. But generally quite positive. And I did this kind of numerical 1 to 10 scale feedback as well. So how effective did you find various learning resources amongst all that I was using in this online situation? So there's a lot to unpack over here, but I'm just focusing on Moodle book. And you can see you're generally quite positive in this numerical feedback as well. So, 8+, not quite the top, but reasonably good. And for the same course, for another cohort, Moodle book kind of came up on top by, not by far, but certainly generally positive feedback. So reflected both in the free text feedback and this numerical feedback as well. So generally, you can say quite positive experience. There are some other options out there, obviously. So I was exposed to Moodle lessons as a student myself first. There's certainly something there. That's, I think, better when you have this linear progression, and back and forth is a bit more difficult. It gives you a better handle on keeping a view of the progress of individual students. I haven't used lessons myself as a teacher, so I don't know if seeing what I have told you here today and your experience of lessons, which would you prefer and why? I'd love to hear what you think. There's some similarities with MOOCs as well. However, eventually, MOOC is a different audience, different context, but there are similarities between what I'm doing with books versus what you have on MOOCs. MOOCs, but they are much more professionally done than what I did, so they are really nice and clean interfaces. But typically, they have this kind of narrative text that I wanted to put over here, and typically they don't link to external resources. So there's still, I think, some more learning for me between lessons, MOOCs, and the way I am doing things. So yeah, that was basically what my talk was. Moodle books, I found a feature I stumbled across when creating a specific kind of online course, but I realized using for my conventional teaching, I found it really useful. So that's something certainly I intend to stick with in the post-pandemic world whenever that comes. And student experience feedback has been generally quite positive, and I've used it with like same course and different cohorts. And it's still pretty much similar kind of positive feedback. So certainly I would at least suggest people having a look at it for your own teaching if you're interested. And if you have any comments and feedback, please do let me know. Thank you very much.
That was fascinating. Thank you so much. Perfect timing. That was exactly 10 minutes. I'm so impressed. So we've got one question coming up in chat at the moment. Did you consider crowdsourcing suggestions for content? Did the students suggest any useful additions to your existing content? This is from Jeremy.
Yeah, so I think just maybe one or two, but yeah, that not more than that. So mostly it was me pushing content at them. In part, it might be because the way I teach in like this block teaching, it's just very, very rapid. So they have new chapters review pretty much every day. I'm thinking if they had more time to absorb and digest each chapters, hopefully there'll be more back and forth with the students as well. But yeah.
Charlotte's put a comment to say that one of her colleagues created a similar asynchronous course in Moodle using Stack, and that included automatically graded quizzes as an integral part of the lessons, which sounds very interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, did you try to find out whether the student, I mean, your Moodle book contains material for the course that you are teaching, and includes as well extra links, extra material. Do you know whether the students are accessing the extra stuff that you add in the Moodle book, or just the specific content that will that are part of the lecture itself?
No, that's true. I mean, my feedback is indirect through, like, you know, when I do a mid-course feedback, so I get a sense of how many people have engaged with the deep dive content and so on. But otherwise, I don't have visibility on what links people have clicked, for example. So I think if you do use links in a different way, in a maybe lesson format and so on, it's easier to see how many students have clicked on it and so on. So some of that visibility of what students are doing, where they currently are, that's kind of lost over here. I think that's a trade-off. Yeah.
Have they complained that there is so much in one page regarding any particular topic? Did you have some form of complaints or something?
No, really. I mean, it was generally just a book format. It was almost, completely positive in terms of the structured way of the information. What they did complain about was too much content in the course as a whole. But that's, I think, a different dimension, because it was just a very, concentrated term, just because of the nature of the program I teach. But I don't remember any feedback about, okay, there's too much happening on a page. So,
that of course might be the primary problem with having a very clear format. The first thing they see is the total amount of content. When I first went to Disney World or wherever it was, from a naive UK perspective, I was amazed at their professional managing of the queues. And one of the biggest techniques was when you joined the queue, it didn't look too long. And after you'd been there half an hour, you went around the corner and found really you were only in the first 10% of it. And I'm wondering whether that might help students not get depressed early on.
No, I did a bit of that, and so when the page comes up, it's all of it. But I was being a bit sneaky, so I would hide the chapters after that. So they have no way of knowing how many chapters are left, but only how many chapters there currently are. So I would, you can hide and, make chapters visible as show chapters as well. So yeah, I was being a bit sneaky that way.
Yeah. Somebody's got their hand up. Oh, Anna?
Yes. Hi, Wakar again. A question about the accessibility of the resources, because then students will have to be connected to the internet to gather like the whole material, not just lecture notes. So otherwise, let's say in the classical or I don't know, this how what was my experience during my undergraduate many years ago. It was just I had the notes by the written, or like, I don't know, 5 years ago, you have the PDF handouts and you can revise them anytime you want. But in this format, you need connection to the internet.
No, that's fair comment, and that's, I think, another trade-off there, because I mean you have the feature of just clicking a button and it creates PDFs out of your books, but because it's so that's there, but because there's so much multimedia there, so you kind of lose most of it in a way, because links to external YouTube videos, podcast here, article there, that's all kind of lost. So what I do is that I provide the slide deck as a separate resource as well, so that is there for people who want to have that. But because my narration is not complete without the books, my slides are not the narration, they are snapshots of it. So I say it's there, but I prefer it if you revise it through my books, but I give them the option. So not constraining them to just forced to go through the books that way. Yeah.
So they'll be forced to take notes on their own then from all the stuff. That's good. Thank you.
We should probably move on now. I would like to ask at some point a question about whether that's saving you a lot of work or just creating a whole load of new work. But we don't really have time for more questions now. So we'll move on to Imed, who's going to talk about probably a problem that a lot of us are dealing with. He's looking at the challenges and solutions around remote dissertation project supervision.
Thanks, Fiona, and welcome everyone. As Fiona stated at the earlier, I'm going to talk about a problem that every one of us is facing nowadays, especially with honors project dissertations. Dissertation project in general for undergraduate and postgraduate students. So not only highlighting the problems and the impact of COVID on the quality of supervision and the entire workflow, but also I'm trying to give a solution that I have tried to implement myself during the previous years. So I'm going to talk about the situation, what is needed for dissertation project supervision, what we expect during this process, and then I'm going to consider a particular case for our honors project in the School of Computing at Edinburgh Napier University, and then give you an overview of what I pretend is going to be a solution for all kind of collaborative work, all kind of dissertation project, how we can have a clear and well monitored process there. So as we know, the dissertation project in honors, masters, PhD, and so on, they are vital for the student learning. And usually student satisfaction in NSS surveys and others a form of feedback are reflected in this, whether they are well supported or not. And the dissertation project, honestly, they play a vital role in shaping the student career, because that's what employers are looking for, to see how the student managed to do their projects and so on, rather than from where they have been graduated. This process is a bit complex, because usually a student, when they come, they start the honors or masters or PhDs, usually they start without clear ideas, or the project is not well framed, well refined, the literature is not done in depth. So it takes a lot of overhead, a lot of discussions with the supervisory teams and so on before framing these discussions. So there is a lot of issues around this, and this is usually in normal condition. I'm talking here in normal condition, and we'll see that COVID is going to magnify this further. So the other things that usually students, they are looking for previous projects, they are looking for good experiences, looking for previous assessment of similar projects, and they want to try to learn from that. And unfortunately, many higher education institutions, they don't have databases for projects or databases for successful projects. And sometimes there are the development department, CPDs, training courses, and so on, which are provided by student support services. They are there for the student, and usually they are needed during the dissertation project, whether they are for research skills, problem solving, presentations, peer reviewing, and these kind of things. Usually they are provided outside the life cycle of the dissertation project. So these are not linked usually to the life cycle of the project. So again, within these issues, there are other administrative issues related to the supervision, allocation, the quota between staff, conflicts, delays, and these kind of things. And we have all noticed that even during, as I said, normal condition, there is issues to manage all of this. So what happens during COVID? We are no longer in contact with our students. They disappeared. We disappeared, all of us, and we are using different virtual environment to run webinars, and we are juggling between jumping between different tools, because MS Teams doesn't work. We move to WebEx, to Skype, and so on, and we try to keep control over this. So it was very, very hard to do this exercise. There is a lot of overhead, administrative overhead, because we need to do the job double. We need to double the effort for our teaching and other staffs. There is a lack of coordination. We were not prepared to this situation. The other things that we have a lot of increased number of student requests to suspend or to defer their assessment or to ask for extension and so on. So the supervisor that lost the track where the student is progressing with his project, what is going on, when he's going to come back, what we have agreed before, and so on. So in these situations, it became, as I said, a clear problem, and everyone is lost in a kind of what I call a maze, dissertation project maze. So how we can sort out this? So I come up with a software, an entire software, which is called 3C. It's Collaborate, Communicate, and Control. The idea is not new, because I have started working on this in 2007 when I did at that time my postgraduate in teaching and learning in higher education. And then I tried to convince our department to deploy these tools, but unfortunately there was some kind of resistance. We liked the paperwork, we liked to handle the forms to the supervisor to school office, and so on. Everyone was, how to say, used to that system. And you know, whenever we create changes, usually there is kind of resistance to that. So I wrote a lot of papers, academic, pedagogical papers about this in our teaching fellow journals, and I submitted the idea to the World Bank in 2018. It was selected, the platform, a similar platform, not the entire one I'm going to give you an overview today. It was the top 5 ideas in a competition that is called Idea for Actions by the World Bank. So you can find the references there, and those who are interested, I can give them the paper. So what this platform is for is a paperless platform. It is going to bridge and act as a gateway between the school administrators, the model leader, the supervisor, the student, and is going to record the entire workflow from A to Z, from the beginning of the project into the assessment. So all the communication, all the exchange of feedback, document, everything should be centralized in this platform. So we should be able to track everything. So there is no emails, there is no other tools, all in one single place. So if we look at the honors project, as I said, it's a very long process. We have the student, the supervisor, a second marker, an internal, if you like. We have the model leader, they have the school office. So from the start, there is a lot of exchange between these different parties, and usually the student submit a form to this, they come to the supervisor, discuss formally, and disappear and come back and so on during the year before registering into this project, whether it is master, as I said, or honors project. And then from that, the model leader start to think about who is the adequate supervisory team who are qualified for that project, and then complete the form, sign them, and then the student can start, and then the student define his work plan, try to use Microsoft Teams or other project management tools, and try to set the plan for the entire project. And these usually are paper-based, and they are different ways. So until the end. So what we'd like, it's a long process. In our school, it starts in September and it finishes in May. So with all these milestones and so on, and there are 2 checkpoints at the middle to check the progress of the student, where we need everyone to come and have face-to-face meetings and sign the forms and submit them to the school office. So I'd like to remove all of this headache. So I created this platform, as I said, for a collaborative platform. So all universities, they can set all kind of models, honors project, dissertation project, PhD project, work placement, everything. They can set it there. They can monitor all the projects in one single dashboard for all the schools. For model leader, they can define and configure the different steps or the different phases or the milestones that should be completed by the student and all the supervisory team, and put the forms there and the deadlines, and these deadlines will appear in a very nice dashboard. So he can assign different different roles for the supervisory team and monitor and manage the supervision allocation for each one of them. Then he can also supervise, allocate the supervisory team, change the roles and so on, and he can keep an eye on all of that. The other thing, he can also, as I said, in the dashboard, he can see the progress, what are the students who are struggling, or are the students who are not progressing, and so on. And also he can reallocate if needed, he can suspend, he can do that. So these suspension, usually they are done in a separate committees, and then the supervisor is kept uninformed. Usually we don't know whether that suspension or extension has been validated, and so everything now should be clear in the system. We can see everything there, and we can reallocate and restart again. The same thing for the supervisor. He can access the project databases, he can submit bids, he can express interest to supervise a specific project. So we don't need to leave this for the model leader to choose who is the adequate one. So there is a freedom there. So the supervisor can bid for the best project or the best students, or the one that are in line with their research or teaching interest. And they can specify the role, whether they are going to be a supervisor or part of the internal examination team, and so on. For the student, the same thing, as you can do all the steps, submit a proposal, accept a proposal, monitor the progress, define tasks, communicate with all the parties, always using the system. So you can see a proposal, you can apply, you can monitor that, as I said, in the dashboard.
Then you're just over 10 minutes now, so if you could wrap up quite soon.
Yeah, exactly. So as I said, this is the workflow. It's mixed up between what is defined in the process and what the student defines. So everything, we can cascade them there in a nice way, and it can be monitored easily for this. So I tried this with my student, and for all the screen I presented here are just samples for the previous names and other stuff, but the platform is available for anyone to test it. So there is a website for that, 3cteams.com. It's open for all university in Scotland to try it. And thank you.
Thanks. That was really interesting. That sounds really useful. Are there any questions? There's nothing in the chat at the moment. Would anybody like to jump in with a question?
No, but I'd just like to applaud. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
So in your university, I mean, you said you've tried it with your student yourself. Is there anyone else at your university that has tried the system as well, the application?
Yeah, that's why I said in the next step is to try it in different schools, in the business school, health school, and so on. And because the platform is, I will claim it is universal, it's generic, it is customizable for all kind of projects. So we can, regardless of the process, the steps, the phases of each project, we can accommodate all of them. So it is going to, I don't forecast any problem for other schools, whether regardless of the size of the teams, the length of the project, the forms, everything should be fine.
Is there any clear definition of what's happened to the data that is saved on those servers, considering that people from other universities want to try it?
Well, this is going to be linked to the cloud platform to every single university. So we provide the software, they have to integrate it with the authentication system there, and they have full control over the files, the data, everything there. So it should be part of any actions in place.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? I might just jump in with a question then, if I may. So I was just wondering what kind of evaluation you've done with this. I mean, have you done evaluation with different teaching staff in different environments to get their feedback?
As I said, I published the paper before about the requirements. I presented the blueprint platform, and I ran a large survey with honors master students and with around 50 members of staff in our university, and most of it to present the feature and to present what should be in the platform. And they welcomed this idea. Now with the student, the feedback I got from the student, it reduced a lot, it improves a lot the communication process. The engagement of the student is much better. Even for those who have suspended or asked for deferral of assessment, we can freeze the project and we can come back to the project and we know where we stopped. It went very it ran very well and smoothly. This is with a group, a small size of student, around 10 students I supervised this year. I would say, then when we run it at a larger scale, and probably universities can help us in this, we'll have a good picture of how the system works and scales.
Great. So it's really appealing. Brilliant, thanks. I think we need to move on now. So the next talk is Jeremy Singer, who's going to be talking about pivoting from a blended MOOC to fully remote delivering.
Thanks, Fiona, and thanks, everybody. I think I win the prize for the longest title for my talk. Yay. Before I get into the detail, I want to challenge you all to think about something. So you ready? Time to start thinking. How many programming languages have been invented in Scotland? Well, there's an interesting question, isn't it? So have a little think. I'll give you 10 seconds to see how many you can come up with. And then I'll give you my top 5 programming languages invented in Scotland. Ooh.
Can we Google it?
Oh, no, don't cheat. Actually, it's quite difficult to Google, you know, it is. So here's number 1. Woo! Robin Milner at Edinburgh invented ML, which doesn't stand for machine learning, it does these days. It's for meta language. There's a fun ML program, recursive factorial. Oh, there's another Edinburgh language. This is called Edinburgh Imp, which I think people programmed in the 1960s. Looks like a 1960s language, doesn't it? Look at that. There's something that swaps 2 variables and then squares them. Oh yes, more recently, the Haggis language is used by the SQA for, I think, National 5 and higher computing questions. That was invented by people at Heriot-Watt, Glasgow and Strathclyde. That looks a bit 1960s as well, to be honest, doesn't it? Never mind, that's a Fahrenheit to Celsius temperature conversion. Oh, and then let's not miss out the St Andrews static language. This is David Turner, who ended up at Kent, but via Oxford went to St Andrews. That's a much more elegant, functional recursive factorial there, isn't it? But top of the list, and probably the most famous programming language that could possibly claim to be Scottish, is Haskell. Woo! So actually, Haskell was invented by a committee, and I think Simon Peyton-Jones, one of the committee members, says Glasgow is the spiritual home of Haskell, because that was where he worked when it was being devised.
Controversial.
Since then, he's moved on to Microsoft, of course. Yes. Oh, and there's a lovely higher order function in Haskell to compute sums and products over lists. Right, so Glasgow University is justifiably proud of Haskell as a famous Scottish programming language, indeed a famous language in general. It appears in most top programming language charts and so on. And so to capitalize on the popularity of Haskell, we decided to build a Haskell massive open online course, a MOOC. And this was going to, you know, promote Glaswegian computing science to the world. This was before COVID. So actually, in 2015, Glasgow University started its blended online learning development scheme. This is what we believe blended online learning is: thoughtful integration of classroom face-to-face teaching experiences with online learning experiences. So the university stumped up lots of money to develop some MOOCs, which could be used as standard MOOCs for online learning, but also could be used in association with the classroom context for blended delivery of some courses. So they gave me and a colleague a semester off to develop a MOOC called Functional Programming in Haskell, Supercharge Your Coding, and it's available on the FutureLearn platform. You can sign up for it now. 20,000 people have done it so far, and some of them even paid the university money to get a certificate. But what I really want to talk about now is how we developed this MOOC usage in the context of a course which is taught at Glasgow. It's an honours level course, and it runs in semester 1, and it runs for 11 weeks altogether. And the first 6 weeks, the students do the MOOC on the FutureLearn platform, and also have, well, had in face-to-face days, a weekly drop-in clinic where they could come along and talk to a member of staff, i.e. me, if they have any problems with the MOOC. And then for the final half of the course, the last 5 weeks, we moved on to traditional lectures, you know, in hard wooden seats and me standing at the front with a bit of chalk and talk, and the online experience was in Moodle. So this is what used to happen. This was the original blended delivery of the course, and that ran 2017 through to 2019. But then, of course, as you know, in 2020, we all had a pandemic pivot. So the University of Glasgow's policy was full shift to online delivery. If you characterize it in Crawford et al.'s taxonomy of responses to COVID-19, basically we delivered everything remotely in 2020. So we adapted our blended learning experience to make it fully remote. And the online stuff stayed the same. We still had FutureLearn MOOC for the first 6 weeks and Moodle for the last 5 weeks. But now, instead of having a drop-in face-to-face clinic, we had a drop-in Zoom clinic. How exciting for the first 6 weeks. So we ran that on Zoom. And then we had Zoom lectures, and yes, everybody else apart from me really did turn their video off for the last 5 weeks, which were run, I suppose, in a more traditional Zoom lecture style. So this is what I want to just tell you about very briefly for the next couple of minutes. We, as part of this pandemic pivot, reduced high-stakes assessment. Rather than having a massive end of course final exam, we introduced lots of extra smaller pieces of coursework which ran throughout the semester, and students accumulated credit through that route. I asked the students whether they enjoyed online teaching. 1/3 said, yes, we can study in our pajamas. 1/3 said, don't care. And the other third said, we hate it. We want to be back on campus. I discovered a few interesting things. Zoom chat was really useful. Other people have commented on this. Students really liked being able to post comments while I was talking, or responses to questions and so on in the Zoom chat. It really seemed to be a way that they could sort of engage and really actively interact with the course coordinator. A questions queue is also useful. Other people mentioned Padlet. We used Slido to do this. And the nice thing about this is it really feels like social media. You can add thumbs up to questions, or, you know, downvote questions if you don't think they're interesting, or post your answers. And again, this seemed to be a very effective way of students engaging outside of class time with the course. And then I had my own podcast series as well. Students loved apparently jogging and listening to functional programming being narrated on a podcast. So this was something I hadn't done before, but something that really seemed to be useful to students in this kind of more disconnected remote environment. Oh, there's the Slido questions with some questions upvoted. And that's what they said about podcasts a nice touch, an innovative way to cover concepts. Okay, so some students said it was great. We liked FutureLearn. It worked really well. They liked coursework chunks in smaller units and so on. It's more manageable. Other students said, oh, FutureLearn's boring. The MOOC material isn't in-depth enough. There were too many assignments. We constantly had some type of coursework. I would say, I've put both comments in the interest of balance. More students preferred the MOOC style and the smaller coursework units than people who didn't. So to conclude, having a blended format before the need to fully pivot to remote teaching meant that I had much less work to do in terms of delivering my course remotely. Somebody else commented on this already today. So I think a blended format does let you be more flexible in terms of how you deliver your course. I discovered new ways of interacting with students, particularly text chat in synchronous Zoom sessions and podcasts for more reflective, out-of-band, asynchronous delivery. Student feedback was mixed, and student performance, well, they've got some coursework marks in the bag, but the final exam is in 2 weeks' time, so we'll see how they've done and perhaps compare that to previous year's performance as well. Thanks. That's the end of my presentation.
Brilliant, Jeremy, thanks. That's even slightly under time, which I think is a first for today, so that's great. Thank you very much. There's nothing in chat at the moment. Does anybody want to either put their hand up or just jump in with a question for Jeremy?
Okay.
Ooh, Wakar's just asked a question in chat. Thanks.
Oh, yeah.
Was the podcast a monologue or did you talk to other people? Great. So I started off just on my own, but then I got the class rep to come and talk to me in a little dialogue, and I also spoke to other functional programmers. So it did turn into a bit of a sort of interview format. I never had more than 2 people on the podcast, but yes, I think it wasn't a monologue.
Interesting. Maria, do you want to?
Yes, did you mention the Zoom drop-in session? Was it well attended?
Great. So I was, am I beeping? Yes, I am. Let me stop that. That's my timer. Good. I think the Zoom drop-in session had about maximum of 80 people. Class size was 100, 110. It dropped down to about 50 people in, towards the end of the semester.
And comparing to the face-to-face, how was the...
Great, yeah. So I think the drop-off was less in the remote delivery format than I'd see in face-to-face lecture attendance.
Oh, okay.
That sort of leads to a question I'd like to ask, which is how much of this would you continue using if you could do everything face-to-face?
Oh, isn't that interesting? That's what I'm going to scratch my head and think about over the summer. Yes, I think the idea of having Slido or some kind of questions queue to drive, the students' interest and for them to be able to rank things for me to talk about, I think that's really nice, and I'd certainly like to keep that going. I don't know how to replicate the Zoom chat in a live face-to-face lecture. Have you got any ideas, Fiona?
No, I've been thinking the same thing. I mean, I've also experienced the same thing with the Zoom chat. This live chat is a really interesting way for the students to engage with what you're talking about, to talk to each other without that being distracting. One thing I found with that, because I was doing a first year course where we had the whole range from people with advanced higher or whatever to people who are just beginning, that it can be quite intimidating, and the people who tend to chat are the very strong students in my experience. And
good. I found that as well.
That's I think I said that in the chat earlier. I teach second year, but it's a similar situation. Initially I had sort of people would ask me questions on Teams, but it was all the keeners sort of asking me extra super duper keen questions on Teams, and then I realized previous years I'd had students come up to me and ask me halfway through an object-oriented programming class, what's an object? And I wanted them to be able to ask me that sort of question anonymously. So then I switched to Slido halfway through, and I explained to them why. Like, some of them missed Teams, but I said I want people to ask me questions like, what is an object, and not feel like a dummy. So I switched to anonymous so they could ask those sort of questions.
There is, you're right, Mary-Ellen, there's this kind of show-off element to some of these questions, isn't there? And I think I tried to deal with that by attempting to answer them, but also encouraging people who were less confident and perhaps competent to ask questions as well. Yeah, I think there's got to be a balance there, hasn't there? Mm-hmm.
Steve's got his hand up.
Well, just contributing to this, I think previous to lockdown, there was a notion of which I would call a 2-channel classroom about how to get at this problem. Because I think one of the few ways in which humans are fundamentally not well equipped for discussion is when you're in a group, you can't tell whose question is going to be the most interesting until after they've asked it. And that's a fundamental limitation, which I learned as a PhD student, where characteristically seniority asked the questions, and the PhD students would quickly realize seniority does not predict quality in questions. It's independent. So one thing which was experimented with for a bit was having a live Twitter feed going in a face-to-face thing, but Slido is probably better because it's more directly designed for that. It probably works. It may work better if you can afford a person who's like a chairman ordering the questions on, how relevant they are or things.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I didn't talk about this, Steve, but another course which I delivered during the lockdown was with Quintin. We co-taught it, and rather than alternating sessions, we were both in the session together. One of us would be moderating questions while the other one was talking, and that seemed to work really well, but it takes twice as many people.
I use Mentimeter, which has a voting system for the students, so they can see all the questions and they vote up what they want. So that's ranked by what the students think is interesting, which I found really useful.
Yeah, also. When I experimented this with Sarah Honeychurch, who acted as the chair, she'd use the channel if the students weren't flooding it, with Googling stuff, finding typically better slides than I had to what I was talking to. But because it's silent, you see, it doesn't, apart from embarrassing the lecturer, it doesn't disrupt it. So that's the thing, the audio channel can't have more than one person talking, but having these parallel digital channels can be exploited in a number of useful ways.
Yeah, really interesting.
And students are so used to multitasking as well and receiving information on different channels at the same time. Yeah, we should take advantage of that.
Definitely. So I think we need to move on now. That was really fascinating. Thanks, Jeremy. Now, I'm pleased to say that through the combination of screwing up the timetable and starting late through technical problems, we're now back on track. We're exactly on time for the final talk. So this is Patrizia talking about a subject that's actually very close to my heart, and I've been thinking about a lot, which is around what's happening to the PhD students who are missing out on all the casual learnings they get from being in the office. So Patricia, are you ready to share your screen?
Yes, I am. Let's do this. And where am I? Here, no. Whoa, wait, sorry. Here. Does this work? Do you see my slides in
Perfect.
Perfect. Well, good. So yeah, I'm moving a little bit away. I realized that most people are talking more about undergraduates at this time because there are so many of them, obviously. But PhD students also have a little bit of, also experience quite a bit of problems during the pandemic. And well, why am I talking about this? So my name is Patrizia Di Campi-Samito, and I just finished my PhD at the University of Glasgow. And while I was still a PhD student, I was a student rep a year ago maybe, and I was running the PhD support group at the University of Glasgow. So I was sending out weekly reminders that this is happening, that we have drop-in sessions every week. So people were getting emails from me. All the PhD students were getting emails from me every week. So I was one of the people that they knew they can reach out if they have questions or if they have problems or anything like that. So that's why I got a little bit of information through that, and I want to talk about this. So first of all, what pre-lockdown, all the things we could do in the office pre-lockdown that I personally also remember really taking advantage of. You had this really easy opportunity to ask questions while you were doing something. So you're in the office, you just use some software for the first time and you have no idea how it's working. So you want to do something specific, it doesn't work, and you just ask, hey, this doesn't work, does anyone know why not? And somebody can ask, yeah, this thing you can't do like that, you have to do this, and it's really complicated. And so it saves a lot of time, and you could just really get someone to help you right there and then. This was really helpful. But things like submitting your first paper, it was already so confusing writing the first paper, knowing how to do this, but then you can come to the submitting part, for example, and you have to think about licensing and which one to choose there, or things like that you have no kind of experience for, and asking takes a minute, trying to find out by yourself takes forever. What you also have is like office discussion of more senior researchers. So I was lucky enough in my office, I had senior researchers. I had another PhD student who became a close friend of mine. So we were chatting about all kinds of things. And she also came from Germany, so could talk about what it's like to be like a German here now doing this. I could share that. I had senior researchers in all kind of subject areas that I needed. So I was doing thermal in-car feedback. I had someone doing in-car research. I had someone doing thermal research. I had someone really knowing a lot about statistics. So I had people right there just asking questions, and listening to them discuss things by themselves already give you more insight into how, into procedures of things. How do things work at the university themselves? How do things work with conferences? You just pick up a lot. And also in terms of terminology, you just hear how people talk about these things, which you have never done before. And this already gives you a lot of insight. And obviously you have peers in the department, not just in your office, but also in the department, where you get coffee and you start talking to people. You get reassurance from people, especially in the beginning of the PhD, you know, when imposter syndrome is really riding you badly, right? And then you have other people, and you just talk to them, and they're like, yeah, I know this feeling, I know this is an experience I also had, and that helps you a lot to kind of realize what is to expected, maybe not normal, but what is to expected at a specific stage during your PhD, right? So these things help throughout the PhD, I feel, but especially in the beginning when you just come and everything is new. But now during lockdown, we have the problem, people are working isolated from home. So some of them haven't even come to Glasgow, to wherever you are. They don't know the people there yet. They are in their home country, some of them. Others are in their flat, but still might not know people if they just started. Everyone is stressed out because of health concern, right? We have to think about all the measures we have to do. So things that that everybody has already, but specifically also to this home working experiences. Some don't have comfortable office locations. They have no quiet space. Some have no human contact. That's for example, me living by myself in my flat. You don't see anyone whatsoever. Others have the other problem, too much human contact. You can't get away from people suddenly because you're locked in this flat with others or things like that. And then everyone has varying personal circumstances, and everyone is aware of that. So everyone is quite clear on, this is me. I know everybody else has a different life. So everybody adapts in different ways. And it makes it hard to kind of reach out, because you don't want to burden anyone else. You're not sure, is this now a time where I can actually talk to others, because they might have a very different experience than I have right now. And this is one of the reasons why asking others for anything right now becomes a big thing. So you don't have this casual interaction in the office right now. So you need to kind of always contact someone if you have questions. So the big questions, they might be picked up if you have like your supervisor meetings, and hopefully everyone now has really weekly supervising meetings, because that is also not something that everybody really has. It's, PhD experience can really vary so much. So this is really important right now. But the times for the small things, you know, the things like what Mary Ellen said before, like what is an object? Those questions where you think asking that would make you look stupid. Those questions, they don't get asked right now, because your main kind of interaction is with your supervisors, and there you have like this obstacle of not wanting them to think you're stupid or you don't know things that maybe they think you should know at this time. And also, if you're a new PhD student and you don't really know anyone, who do you even ask? I mean, apart from the supervisors, maybe it's easier to go to peers, but who do you really ask when you don't know anyone? And then how do you ask those questions? Either you write a really long message, because usually in the office you would have some kind of context, and out of a context you can ask questions. But here you have to provide the context to kind of explain what the question actually is. So either that is like this long kind of message, or you kind of ask someone if you can make an appointment. But then before you do any of that, because it's such a big obstacle compared to what we had before, you spend this long time of just trying to find things out by yourself. You just try to go at it, and if you have spent a lot of time and it's like, this is not worth it, I can just ask someone. You realize that like in 2 minutes you can have the answer, but there's already this kind of obstacle to go out and ask others about this. And an experience that I had, that people are really very apologetic when they ask questions right now. Maybe that is just me, but I get, if someone sent me an email to ask questions, or I get a message on Slack or something, then I first have like this long text of apologizing to taking up some time. They know I'm super busy and everyone is busy, but they still want to ask me this. And I feel like I'm happy to answer questions, but everyone seems to feel uneasy to just ask them and to kind of approach someone at the moment. And all of this together obviously impacts the self-esteem and the motivation, and increases the imposter syndrome, because the students, they don't really know that everyone knows that they can't know this right now. They're just starting, they're just learning. But you know how imposter syndrome works, right? You seem like everyone knows this apart from you. And that's especially hard for things that you casually learned beforehand, because those are not the things you think about explaining to other people. You just start to use them because you just kind of absorb them. And realizing that other people don't have the opportunity to just absorb them in their everyday life is really, really something that I became aware of. So what can we do against this? Well, how can we help with this? So we raised this issue with the research student committee at our university and our department, and they kind of created these virtual offices in MS Teams. So they made sure that every new PhD student, and hopefully also staff, I'm not sure about that, but they were assigned to offices, like to physical offices at the university, even though they don't need them right now, but to make sure that they have some kind of room that they belong to. And then they were added to these virtual offices, so they can have this kind of chats within the office. So I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure how this is taken up, because in my office, we don't have new PhD students, so we're using Slack still to kind of communicate. But this is at least an attempt to kind of recreate this. So you can work alongside each other and kind of recreate this place and this space where you can just chat about things that come up. In my research group, which is the multimodal interaction group, we now started to have bi-weekly meetings. So we have we communicate a lot in the Slack. We have now a dedicated private Slack channel we call Virtual Coffee, where this is a space without any kind of supervisor. So anyone who has to supervise someone is not in this Slack channel. So you can have a space where you can ask questions. And then we have these bi-weekly meetings really dedicated to especially new PhD students being able to just ask questions about anything. And I want to point out also that I was talking about the PhD support group in the beginning. So we moved away to the SICSA PhD support network. So it's open now for all SICSA institutions, for computing science and all SICSA institutions. We have weekly drop-in sessions, but we also have a Discord channel with an Ask Your Peer channel. And there, well, people can have the chance to kind of ask things anonymously. So you don't have to choose a name for that. You can just talk to others. So this would be another resource that people can use if they feel like they want to ask but don't want to give their name. And I'm done, no worries. So that was all I wanted to talk about.
Wow, that was perfectly timed as well. Thanks. That perspective was really, really interesting. I think that was a really fascinating discussion of all the issues that I've certainly been aware of as a supervisor. So we've got one comment in chat at the moment. Many of my students, this is from Charlotte, many of my students this year set up Discord servers for this. This seemed to help them a lot to have a space to ask for help or just casually chat. Yeah, I think Discord servers, actually a lot of my first year students have really found Discord a really good way to keep in touch as well. Yeah.
I think it's also a good way because you can choose to give your name, but you can also choose to be anonymous, right? So it depends on what you talk about. So in the SICSA support network, this has one focus on mental health. So we want to be able, we have these drop-in sessions which are focused more on mental health. But I feel like if you're struggling with those things, they become a mental health issue at some point. But yeah, we can also use this as just another space to ask questions to your peers without bothering people.
Mm-hmm. Steve has got his hand up. Steve.
Right. Yeah. This is an opinion backed on absolutely no positive action, so feel free to jeer at it. I feel that all the talks, and of course many of them in the last year about dealing with lockdown are all in some sense, because we've got habits that don't fit common practice, and you're being frank about another lot. I feel what we ought to be trying, and almost none of us manage to do this, and me least of all, is to actually try and develop habits or practices that would solve this, but instead of just using implicit practices. So here's a few random suggestions, like perhaps in all emails, we should declare the response time that would be useful or expected. And in a mixed group, you could think of setting up a convention where, let's say, the supervisor isn't expected to respond till the end of the day. Other peers are expected, if they're going to reply at all, it should be sooner. You could have a little declared hierarchy of who should be responding first to stop social deference, which makes it actually bad for everyone. Things like that. But I've just not worked on this creatively, but that's the sort of thing I think that might be useful. Now, feel free to contradict that suggestion.
Well, one of the problems I see with that is that, first of all, you still have that to ask. So it's to kind of reach out to ask. So I feel like one of the big things we really, that really helps in an office is that you don't have obstacles to just asking. So if we still have like a remote environment where you, I mean, if you say that the supervisor should answer until the end of the day, then it feels like it's more written question or something, and you still have to go out and do this, and then you still have this obstacle of feeling stupid, especially in the beginning, that your supervisor would still see those some of those things that I brought up are not solved by this, I think. So it would still be well, in my experience, a lot of supervisors will not answer till the end of the day. So you wait a couple of days for an answer from a supervisor. So in that time, you would have contacted peers already, I guess. So I feel like there's still more to this, and it's still. I agree that there are a lot of habits that we all have, and we feel like we should be able to still kind of live with, even though everything has changed around us, and that might be a little bit of a problem. But I feel like for this, habits alone might not be enough to replicate what we had before.
It isn't, although we could collect anecdotes of people who've been intelligent about it. Now, this is pre-lockdown, but a friend of mine, Vicky Gunn, moved from Glasgow University to a post in the Glasgow School of Art, where she was an outsider, and deliberately got to share an office, unusual for a professor, with a more junior person. And that, of course, gave her an ear into many of the internal issues. And because she was asking, the junior person, of course, quickly was proud to help. So it seemed to me she plugged herself in when she knew it would be difficult in a way that was really clever. I would not have thought of that.
No, that I think is a great idea. Also, it takes away a bit of the fear you have maybe in the beginning to even ask your supervisor. So I feel like that is also a part of the PhD journey, right? In the beginning, it's like, oh my God, the supervisor, and then later on, it's like just someone you can talk to, right? So I feel like having someone in the office all the time would actually help with that and get this down a little bit faster.
You mentioned that sometimes they send an email, they ask a question, the supervisor will respond maybe at the end of the day or a couple of days later and everything. Do you believe that it is very important for the supervisor and the student to sit together and actually have some clear expectations at the beginning of their journey? To set clear expectation, because probably many have lose expectation, which means that the goalpost on the communication or interaction between them change sometimes, and it can affect the student, how the student sees the supervisor.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that is a good idea. I mean, things like that, how often you see supervisors, those things can change throughout the story, but being clear about that in the beginning, I think is is a good thing. And also being clear about like how fast you do answer emails, because that was something. So for my supervisor, I'm super lucky with my supervisor. Yeah, my supervisor is amazing, but answering emails fast is not one of his strong points. So that is something that you have to learn, right? And I'm again, everybody, that is the part of the journey is kind of getting to know how to deal with your supervisor, right? So you have to learn how to do with that, but especially in the beginning might be harder to kind of get a good feeling for this. So being open about it from the beginning might be nice. But that is another thing that you learn when you share an office with people in your group, because they already give you like feedback on the supervisor as well. That is one of the things where you can also talk about the supervisor and other people's experience like that. Because it's hard to not take something personal in the beginning. It's like, well, I asked this question, I don't get an answer. Is this because the question is too stupid? Oh my God, what does my supervisor think? Oh my God, and you go crazy there. And someone else is like, yeah, it always takes this long. It's like, okay.
I think being able to bitch about your supervisor is a really important part of being a PhD student.
Yeah.
That's pretty much time up, I think. Maria, is there any plans for, are we going to have a bit of a group discussion, or are we just kind of wrapping it up now? Or?
Well, oh, Jeremy, you have your hands up.
Oh no, that was just me applauding
all right.
Paddy's talk.
Oh,
sorry. Yes.
Oh, it was applauding. So it's just to have an informal discussion at the end, and with the presenters if they are available there, because I believe all these presentations were quite interesting, and I'm sure many people felt they would like to talk a little bit more, discuss this topic before. And I mean, just general informal, probably we should stop recording as well, because it's going to be, I mean, we can talk about anything else for the next 24 minutes.
You mean we can ask the stupid questions now?
Yes, but thank you very much for everyone who, just in case someone is going to leave right now, I just want to say thank you very much for participating. It's a